Hi, I'm Jim Donio, and I'm really happy that this afternoon I'm going to be having a conversation with my good friend Chris Diamore about his life in music. Chris, how are you today?
I'm great. How about you?
Good, good. I'm doing really well.
Good.
Um, of course, we love talking about music. We've both spent all of our lives, both of us, in different ways, being around music. How did it start for you? What was the first sort of indication that you were a musical person?
So, I guess I was born into the music scene with my father being an accordion player since the age of 10 or 11, I believe. And my parents raised my brothers to be saxophone players. And r- right away, I took a major liking to music as a young kid, always dancing around in the living room whenever they had the radio on or records or CDs playing. So I would say I was really born into it.
Hmm. And who are your family obviously was a musical family.
Mhm.
When did you start to learn to play an instrument yourself?
So before I learned an instrument, my father sat each of us down when we were, I would say, about 6 or 7, and taught us at a little keyboard that he had from when I would say, the late 70s, early 80s, of how to read music, the notes and the scales, the treble clef, the sharps, the flats, all that good stuff. But I would say when I was in first grade, so I was about 8, we all had to take all the arts classes at the performing arts charter school I went to, and I learned with 30 kids uh, all at the same time of how to play the violin.
So that was the beginning. The violin was the beginning.
Yeah.
Ironically, ironically, that was my first that was my first instrument.
Oh,
It
really?
did not last long. Um, I moved over to the accordion, and
Okay.
I was a really tiny. I mean, I'm still not a big person, but I was a really tiny child,
Right.
and accordion was just like a little unwieldy for me. So that didn't last. I gravitated toward after that. I gravitated toward playing the organ, and I
Oh,
did that
okay.
for a little while in school. But then I eventually ended up on the xylophone in school. That's what I ended
Oh,
up, and then I made the transition from xylophone to glockenspiel in what you and I know as Mummers String Band, which is for, I guess, for the uninitiated, is kind of a marching band, and
right.
so the xylophone or glockenspiel is familiar to people, in that way. Um,
Hmm.
so it's established. You grow up, with music being part of you. As you grew, who were some of the people that inspired you outside of your family? What kind of role models did you have as you thought about perhaps having not just a childhood in music, but an adult life in music?
So, some of my inspirations of role models, when I was younger, was always my saxophone teachers and obviously my family. Um, it, I would say it wasn't until I met in third or fourth grade when there was a turnover in the music department at the charter school. His name was Jeremy Rosa, and I've had a great connection with him from day one. And believe it or not, years later, we reconnected when he asked me to come into the high school. They branched from K through 8 to a high school building, um, to come in and write for them and work with kids and direct them a couple times a week and then conduct the concerts. And so he was my first role model, always encouraging me to do more and to go, to always achieve, to strive to achieve more than what I originally intended to. But when I got older, I looked at, fell in love with Paul Desmond with the saxophone. To me, it's a dry martini sound, which I know is weird to describe, but that's the best description of his sound as a player. From an actual, listening to music perspective, I would say a lot of John Williams with, not so much Star Wars because everybody says that, but a lot of his other stuff that he's written is incredible. And I always looked up to people like him, Danny Elfman, who are two totally different writers, with what they can do and how they write. And to me, listening to that, to what they write, is I could feel and see without seeing the movie. I could shut my eyes and see complete darkness, but feel what is going on and know exactly what they're trying to depict with their music.
What about some, really, I'd say historic figures in that space? People like Leonard Bernstein or Violin, people like that, whose music that has really stood the test of time, for such a long time.
I'm actually. It's funny you mentioned Leonard Bernstein. I'm a major. I follow a lot of his work. I believe that yes, when you think of Leonard Bernstein, what do you think of right away? The West Side Story, which is, I think, was phenomenally written. With the operatic ways of, without it being an opera, but a lot of his works, and also from a conducting side of things. It wasn't until I would say after his death when people really started talking about more and more of how great of a conductor and a teacher he was. Mm-hmm. I mean, I remember coming across on YouTube maybe 10 years ago, the young people's concerts that used to air, I believe, on the weekends. And he would bring the classical setting of music, and not just that, but any type of music, but mainly classical.
Yeah. And
bring it to the young form. And I wish there was something like that when I was a kid that would be on TV, on the weekends instead of watching cartoons.
We could use it. I mean, I think we could just use that right now. Yeah. So certainly on the film side of things. Full disclosure, West Side Story is my all-time favorite movie. I could probably have seen it hundreds of times, and actually, they just remade the movie.
Yeah.
Spielberg just remade the movie. It was supposed to come out in December, but because of COVID, it's now postponed for a year. But I'm very curious to see, what his take on it was. How about on the Broadway side of things, like Rodgers and Hammerstein, Stephen Sondheim? So do you follow? Do you follow Broadway music and composing as well?
So I remember first going to see, I believe it was actually West Side Story at the 2009 revival, with my aunt. She used to run these bus trips to New York. You would spend a day up in New York, do lunch, and then go see a show. I remember the first, that was, yes, there was West Side Story. It was the first Broadway show I ever seen on Broadway. And I was taken back by taken by surprise of the atmosphere. Obviously, I was more into the music, and we had front row seats, and I'm leaning against the railing the whole time, looking down at the musicians in the pit.
Yeah.
As it's funny, the conductor of that, I was talking to him during the intermission. He says, we don't call it the pit, we call it the orchestra ditch, which I think is a Victor Borge joke. But I think, to me, the Broadway music and the style, not so much of today, but the golden era of the West Side Story, the Guys and Dolls, the Mame, the Hello Dollies.
Yeah.
I think that music, it has stood the test of times, and I think it would always be here till God knows when.
Yeah.
But I really think, that Stephen Sondheim, his lyrics are so, it's so perfect and fitting.
Mhm.
I know that he said that he really does not like what he wrote for West Side Story lyric wise, because he said here's these young street gang punks saying singing these lines that are like, that would be said by a professor at a university, and the language that they were speaking and some of the words. And I find that not to be the case.
Yeah.
But Stephen Sondheim's one of the best. Rodgers and Hammerstein, I love them. Jerry Herman is actually somebody I really look up to. The man who wrote one of the most underrated musicals, music-wise, Mac and Mabel. I just love the music to that, especially Movies Were Movies.
Yeah, Mac and Mabel was Robert Preston and Bernadette Peters starred in that show. I guess Mac Sennett and Mabel Mercer, the story of their relationship. Let's make a transition. So, we've talked about growing up with music, learning to play an instrument, developing an appreciation for music, for musical artists, creative artists, composers, and so forth. So how old were you, and what sparked your interest in actually composing and arranging music, and which do you prefer? What's your preference?
So again, it goes back to elementary school. In sixth grade, we had to choose a major, and that's what we stuck with from sixth, seventh, and eighth grade. And that was the only arts class that we would have every day. And I would playing the violin. My music teacher, Jeremy Rosa, came up to me saying, do you think your father would do me a favor and rewrite a viola part? And I asked my father, and my father said, I just don't have the time with work. And at the time, being a mummer, string band, it was that time of the year, so everything is extra rehearsals. So he didn't have the time. So what I did was I sat down and with the score and wrote out a new viola part. I sat at the keyboard. I was hammering away notes and trying to figure it out. And I presented the music to him the following morning at our arts class, our music class. And he said, wow, I actually really like this. I really underestimated your father for being a mummer and arranging for mummers years ago. For being able to write a string part. I said, actually, he turned it down because he didn't have the time. I actually wrote it. So I was 13, I believe, at the time, maybe 14. And he, after that class ended, he kept me for another 15 minutes and asking me, how did you learn how to do this? I said, I don't know how to do it. I honestly don't. And so from that point on, he kind of encouraged me to write small arrangements or little samples of things, like Christmas songs or whatnot. And the string orchestra, we would try them. And so from a writing standpoint, I was intrigued by it, and the fact that I also found it soothing. And it was another way of expressing my, I guess, creativity that's always been trapped in my mind, always having an idea for something, but never had a form to do it.
Yeah.
So as I got older through high school, my high school teacher, Brian Ewing, was always very supportive of me arranging. And at the time, just dabbling just a little bit with composing, which I believe when I was in high school, it was a major failure because I did not understand really the techniques or the ideas of how to compose. I would say for the longest amount of time, I always preferred arranging because I always found that taking a song that's already been done or a piece of music and writing it in a way that you haven't wrote it, where no one's ever thought about writing it that way, was always intriguing and always to be more of a challenge. Um, I've written a lot of stuff for the Mummers, a ton of stuff for the Mummers, a lot of stuff for schools throughout the area. I'm recently just working with the South Jersey Youth and Friends Orchestra on writing stuff for their holiday program. But the older I got, I would say the last 2 years, so starting around when I was 25, I started to experiment more with composing and started to come into my own element. So I still say arranging is my strong suit and something I would always prefer to do, but I'm starting to find it to be a lot of fun to compose because it's something that, it's original.
What's your, so now the past couple of years you've focused some of your creative energy on composing. So tell me, what's the process? I'm not, a music writer or arranger. In fact, truth be told, I can't read music. I actually played in the band that I was in for 13 years, and I could just hear a song once, twice, and I could play it note for note. I don't know where that comes from, but I was able to do that. So I do have I really respect and appreciate being able to, sit down, someone who sits down with a blank screen, blank sheet of paper, however it's done. So what's your process? How does the thought process translate into actually, to me, and I teach music business. That's, one of my avocations now, as I teach students who want to be in the music business, and a lot of them are artists and creators. And I say music is magic. To me, someone being able to pull out of the universe a song, a composition, to me, it's magic. It's one of God's most amazing gifts that He gives to people, and to me, it's magical. So how does it manifest itself for you? What is your process?
So depending on what it is, whether it's a piece that I just want to write, it usually stems from an idea. I'm more into the writing motifs, which is like the most famous motif ever in the classical world was Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, that ba 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 ba, and then the next thing you know, 7 minutes later, he has the first movement of his symphony based off of 4 notes, and to me that was amazing. But depending on what the situation is, now if I'm writing it just for myself, just for pleasure, I'll milk how long I spend on it. Usually I'll put it away after some time and come back to it, or there's projects that I sat down and were abandoned because I ran out of ideas. But I usually sit down after I come up with an idea that's been bopping around in my head, and I'll sit at the keyboard with a pen and manuscript paper, or pencil and manuscript paper, never write in pen. And I would sit down and just start, hopefully, filling out the page. Usually I'll just start with the top of the page, just no name or anything, and just put the idea I had, whether it's a couple notes or a whole phrase long. And then after that, I'll sit down and just stare at the paper and then start figuring chords out or some structure behind it. And then I just have a sketch of an idea. And then after some time, I go back to it and start expanding on it, and maybe adding another section, or taking the idea and rewriting it. But when I sit down and write something for a specific project, like let's just say like a film, obviously there's a lot more involved. You obviously have to see what's going on, hear the dialogue, hear the to me, knowing how the actors or actresses speak, dialect wise, that could play a difference. Now like if they're like a street thug, it's going to be more of this, I would say more of a bounce to the music. But if they're really like saying each word clearly and they're more professional, like just say like a English teacher at a college or university, to me that's going to be more operatic in a way of writing. So my mind goes all over the place when I'm starting to see when I would see a film that has nothing behind it music wise, and to me it's very difficult because one, you have to figure out ideas of where music should be placed and key important moments, and then after that you have to figure out how to write that specific moment and try to capture the emotions that are on the screen being said verbally, and it's tough. So usually there's a ton of piano sketches I do ranging from 2 staffs to 8 staffs, just to write out ideas and to capture some background parts, not knowing where I'm going to place them yet, of who's going to play it, and the voicing of it. But I would say once I sit down and handwrite out a complete score, which can range from 2 pages to over 100 pages, which can get very messy and hand cramps and everything. So it gets painful.
Yeah.
I tell people.
Yeah. So it's interesting. It sounds like you're saying that intention is really important in inspiring the composition of music. You need to understand, for a film or a TV show, or for whatever it is, or a theatrical piece. Mm-hmm. So you need to know what the intention is of what's the intention of the screenwriter, what's the intention of the of the characters who are having in a scene, having a conversation, or maybe they're just riding down the highway, and the music is supposed to advance advance the story. I mean, what's always been talked about in terms of, to kind of circle back to West Side Story again for a minute, is the way in which the dancing and the music behind the dancing in that piece actually is a character. The dancing and how it advanced the narrative is almost a character by itself, in that piece. So it sounds like you understand and appreciate the challenge of scoring a film, but I also get the sense that you you embrace that challenge. It's something you want to challenge yourself. You want to give yourself sort of the room to grow, to create something like that. What is that like for you? What does that feel like, the prospect of getting to do something like that?
I think it's I think getting the opportunity to do something like that is, like you said, it's before, music is magical, and creating music is magical. So to me, to lend a hand in helping create a magical moment and feeling and process is breathtaking, for a lack of words. But it is to me, it's soothing, but also at the same time, sometimes I just want to bash my head through a wall, because it's very demanding, it's very time consuming, and you also wind up, I would say, if you're up 18 hours a day, just say, 18 of the 17 of those 18 hours, your mind is thinking about what you're going to write. And to me, I love it. It drives me insane though, but to me, to me on a personal level, it's very gratifying to have an opportunity like that and to create something in that manner.
I talk to my students a lot about, I talk about the fact that there's a fine line between creative genius and being crazy. That that there's a very fine line there, because often creative geniuses have a mindset that it can be kind of wild and uncontrolled and not logical.
Yes.
You know what I mean? That you almost have to have a little bit of sort of craziness in your
Oh yeah.
in the way that you create, and some of the best creations come out of that.
Hmm.
To just sort of finish up, here you are. You're in your late 20s now. This has been part of your life for 20 years, just about. Why is music? Why has this sustained for you? You started out, you learned, you were a kid, you learned an instrument, you went to creative school, blah, blah, blah. But now here you are at this point in your life. Why is music so special for you? And, what do you think, from your perspective, what does music bring to the universe that is very special for you personally?
On a personal level, to me, music is not a way of life. It's a way of expression, and it's just breathtaking. Whether I'm standing up in front of a group conducting, sitting down one-on-one with somebody, teaching them privately, writing, arranging, or just giving my advice to others with music and giving my input and what I believe in and what I think music is or how to go about it. I always feel music will always be there. When times are tough, music's there. When you go through a breakup with somebody, what I hear 90% of the time that what they do is they sit down and they listen to the music. And it's just a way of coping with things, but it's also a way to enjoy and enhance life.
Mm-hmm.
My mother is the saint that she is, putting up with years of driving us to music lessons and driving us to gigs or performances, and being at everything that we do music wise, and always looking out into the crowd and seeing her face there shows how much, one, she loves us, but two, how much she loves music.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my Aunt Dot, who passed away in 2011, loved music so much. I used to go after high school, walk to her house, sit down, take my instrument out, and play her the standards from anywhere from the 20s all the way up to the end of Sinatra's era. And she would sing every lyric to every song. She would know every song. She would know who wrote it, who was the first one to play it, the year that it was first debuted at, and she was a major Harry James fan on the trumpet, and I would try to play her anything that Harry James frequently played. And to see the look on her face of the enjoyment of just listening to music, whether I'm playing it, somebody else is playing it, or she's listening to her record player.
Mm-hmm.
She would close her eyes and just have a nice smile and sit in her rocking chair and just rock and just not say a word. And to me, that was I always wondered why. But as I got older, I realized what music means to people. I think there's a slogan out there or saying that without music, the world would be flat. It's more of a pun in music.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it would. I really think it would be flat, because just imagine going for a long car ride by yourself, and there's no such thing as music or even talk radio, just say.
Yeah.
That changes your experience of being in that car ride driving somewhere.
Yeah.
Or like, for instance, a wedding. When you're having your first dance with your significant other for the first time out in public as husband or wife or whatever. There would be no such thing.
Yeah. I mean, people talk about, how music transports, and that you can immediately, your sense memory can go immediately back to a moment when you first heard a song, or when a song was the soundtrack to a particular experience, good or bad. So the last question is, so what about when you're the audience member and the band or orchestra or vocalist is performing something that you composed or arranged? Are you a creator that's thinking, oh, I shouldn't have done that, or I could have done that better, or, oh, that didn't turn out the way I thought? Or do you sort of get filled up emotionally with gratitude when you've done something, you've created something, and now someone or some group is putting your creation out into the world? What does that feel like?
Oh, so there's two sides of that. There's yes, there's a lot of there's always going to be that Monday quarterbacking, but in the moment, it's surreal. At the same time, it's also I always question myself when I'm hearing something I composed or arranged, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, did I really do that? And it's satisfying, and the emotions go all over the place. Thinking about when it started, the journey of when that began, of sitting down to do that, to the whole process of many rewrites and many meetings or discussions about it, and sometimes arguments, creative, good arguments, not bad arguments, never. And sitting down in the seats or standing up wherever it's at and hearing it for the first time played in the public is something I wish everybody in this world can experience, because after all the hard work you put into it or into anything, and to have that opportunity to have that feeling of accomplishment. Now, it's always the case after that moment and it's done being played, everybody claps and everything, and I leave that area of whether it's a concert hall or a public place, whatever it is, already what's going through my mind, darn, I wish I did that differently. And honestly, I hate it so much, but because I always find myself finding after it's said and done with, and you can't go back and change it because it's done, I always find myself years to come, even to always find another idea that would have been better. And I'm just like, darn it, why couldn't I think of that before? And sometimes it's based off of something else I heard. Like there's a music phrase out there, pastiche, which is a musical quotation of another piece of work or a composer. It's kind of like tipping the hat to them, and it's John Williams uses that a lot, and there was an interview I watched of his that he used in not going back to it, but Star Wars, that he referenced a lot of other composers, and the most interesting one was Gustav Holst, referencing the Planets suite that he composed, which the one that he used a lot or used quotations from was the Mars suite, or the Mars movement, which had a lot of clashing and brass hits that really created this tension of like war. And so I get a lot of afterthoughts. I'm like, oh, what if I would have kind of used an idea like that and made it into my own?
Yeah.
And
but that's it's a good way to, it's a good way for us to end our
Yeah.
chat, in that that's what sustains creators.
Yeah.
Because if you create something and you feel, well, that's done, that's over, you know, there's nothing I could, you know, I don't need to create anymore. You know, no one's going to agree with that feeling. As a creator, you always want to create more, and I'm sure that you will.
Yep.
And thank you for sharing your musical journey with us today. And I appreciate, you know, from my perspective, I appreciate getting to know more about what has motivated and inspired you for music. And I wish you, you know, great success in
Thank you.
in what's to come. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you.